All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling Nietzsche, more specifically the prologue to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Our source material is, well, a podcast episode. And let me tell you, it is chock full of thought-provoking stuff. We're talking Zarathustra, a hermit, 10 years, he's been in solitude up in the mountains. Then he decides, hey, it's time. Time to rejoin society. Time to share his wisdom. But here's the thing. The world, well, it might not be ready for what he has to say.
It's like Nietzsche is setting up this tension from the very beginning. You've got Zarathustra just overflowing with wisdom, right? Like the sun radiating. But, and here's the difference, Zarathustra needs someone to receive it. It really makes you wonder if wisdom can even exist alone, in a vacuum. Or does it need that connection, someone to receive it for it to come alive?
Ooh, I like that. Wisdom needing connection to spark. So Zarathustra, down from the mountains, he's a hermit. This hermit, totally in the dark about the whole God is dead thing.
And here's where the Source podcast points something out. Zarathustra, he chooses not to tell the hermit. Maybe he senses he's not ready. Not ready for that kind of radical idea. It's like, even when you're bursting with knowledge, you can't just force feed it, right? You have to meet people where they are. Makes me wonder, are we ready for what Zarathustra has to say?
Now that's a great question. But Zarathustra, instead of staying with the hermit, he goes to the marketplace, the heart of society, He's ready to unveil his big idea, the Übermensch. But hold on, not the kind of Übermensch that gets all twisted in pop culture.
Right, the Source podcast really emphasizes that. This Übermensch, it's not about being superhuman, it's not some power-hungry dictator. They describe it more as someone who rises above the expectations, above the norms, creating their own values, really embracing their full potential. It's radical, this self-creation. And let's be honest, not everyone's going to be into that, especially a crowd looking for a good show and easy answers.
Which is exactly what he runs into. The crowd, they're way more interested in this tightrope walker than in Zarathustra's talk about the Übermensch. They laugh him off, reject his whole message. Kind of makes you think, how often do we choose distractions over something that might challenge us, something that might make us uncomfortable?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the Source podcast said, humanity, we often prefer comfort, the comfort of entertainment, even when it means ignoring uncomfortable truths. And speaking of discomfort, that tightrope walker, he becomes a pretty powerful symbol. He represents humanity itself. Like, we're all teetering between our instincts and this potential to be something more. And there's always the risk of falling into nihilism.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack this tightrope walker thing a bit more. Super interesting, but I'm not sure I'm following all the way.
So, the tightrope walker, he falls. But Zarathustra, he admires his courage. He sees the daring, even in the failure. It's a stark contrast, a contrast to the last men in the crowd. The ones Nietzsche criticizes for their lack of, ambition, spirit. The Source podcast even said that this tightrope walker, it's like a sneak peek into Zarathustra's own journey.
Wait, really? So Zarathustra's a tightrope walker himself. I mean, it makes sense, right? Leaving solitude after a decade, facing a crowd that might not get him at all. What about these last men, then? Am I getting couch potato vibes correctly?
You're not wrong. The last men represent exactly that, the stagnant, comfortable existence where people are content with mediocrity. It's what Zarathustra fears. The Source podcast really got me thinking here. They said the prologue, it's not just about Zarathustra. It's like holding up a mirror to all of us.
Ooh, a mirror. Okay, so we're the crowd watching Zarathustra. What are we supposed to be seeing in this reflection?
Well, think about this. The Source podcast, they called out Zarathustra's arrogance. His assumption that people would just get his message. He thought, I'll come down from the mountain after 10 years and everyone will be on board. But they weren't. He needs to change his approach, right? Can't just force wisdom on people. He has to find the people who are seeking it. He actually says, I need living companions, not dead followers.
Wow, living companions, not dead followers.
That is powerful. It makes you think about, all those times we might have given up too soon, sharing something important. Because people didn't immediately understand or agree, or maybe we've been on the other side, content to just absorb information passively, not really engaging with it.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the challenge of the prologue. For Zarathustra and for us, it's not enough to just possess wisdom, is it? We need to connect, to communicate, to inspire others, to become those living companions together. So Zarathustra, he's not just figuring out his own philosophy. He's got to figure out how to bring people along. But he just faces huge rejection. He's not going back to his cave and giving up, is he?
He does go back to the cave. But not like he's defeated. The Source podcast pointed out that he actually carries the tightrope walker's body back with him. It's a powerful image, isn't it? Like he sees something in that daring, something worthwhile. Even though, The tightrope walker failed.
So it's not him giving up. It's more like he's taking this symbol, this reminder of the potential and the risk of reaching for something more, which makes going back to solitude even more interesting. I mean, if he's realizing he needs people to really make this wisdom matter, why be alone again?
This is where the Source podcast makes a really important point. They say solitude, it's not necessarily the opposite of connection. Actually, it can be a crucial part of it. Think about it. Zarathustra, he needed those 10 years alone to even develop his philosophy, that space to think, to grapple with those big questions.
You're right. It's like can't pour from an empty cup, right? Maybe Zarathustra needs to refill his own cup in solitude before he can share it with anyone else. But how does that fit with the Übermensch? Isn't that all about pushing boundaries? About engaging with the world?
That's where it gets really fascinating. The Übermensch, it's not just about achievements, not about conquering the world externally. It's also internal. This journey of self-mastery, of overcoming yourself. The Source podcast even quoted Nietzsche here. He said something like, "The Übermensch is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth." It's not a state of being, it's becoming.
Whoa, okay. So the Übermensch, it's not like reaching a finish line. It's the journey itself that changes things. But if it's about this constant overcoming, doesn't that sound kind of, I don't know, exhausting? Like, can we ever just chill, enjoy the ride?
That is a great question. And honestly, the Source podcast, they didn't have a clear answer, but they did make a connection to the ancient Greeks, know thyself. That was huge for Socrates. And self-knowledge, well, that was the foundation for a good life, a virtuous life. So maybe striving for this Übermensch, it's not about denying pleasure or rest. Maybe it's about awareness, about knowing your motivations, your desires, and then choosing to act in a way that aligns with your highest values.
I'm starting to see the connections here. So by going back to his cave, Zarathustra isn't giving up on having those living companions. He's taking time to understand himself better, to refine his message so he can connect with people on a deeper level. It's like he's prepping for round 2. But this time, he'll understand himself and his audience better.
I think that's really insightful. It brings us back to that tension we were talking about. Solitude and society, it's not about picking one, is it? It's realizing they actually work together. Solitude, it lets you look inward, discover yourself. And connection, well, that's where you share, where you inspire growth in others.
This whole living companion thing, it's really resonating with me. I think I've been so focused on learning, on knowledge, that I haven't been paying enough attention to, well, the people around me, the people who could help me actually use that knowledge. Like, I was so busy climbing my own mountain, I forgot to look around, see who else might be on the path.
I think a lot of people feel that way. It's easy to get absorbed in your own journey, But Zarathustra's story, it reminds us, even the deepest insights, they're meant to be shared. And finding your tribe, those living companions, that's a huge part of the journey.
So it's not just about being the Übermensch, it's about helping others along the way too.
Yeah.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm still kind of stuck on this going back to solitude thing. If he needs others to fulfill his potential, why be alone at all? Doesn't that seem, contradictory?
I can see why you'd think that. What if, instead of seeing solitude as the opposite, we saw it as, as something you need to build stronger relationships?
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Okay, so solitude, not the opposite of connection, but like an ingredient for stronger connections. I'm still working that one out in my head.
What if you thought of it this way? Solitude, it's like a reset. It lets us reflect, on experiences, emotions, reconnect with our values, like stepping back from all the noise so you can listen to that quieter voice.
Yeah.
Inside. And when you have that clarity, you can show up differently in your relationships, more authentically, with more intention.
So it's not about shutting the world out. It's more like using that alone time to get grounded. And then you can be more present with others. I get that. But does the Source podcast say anything about how Zarathustra's solitude, like how it prepares him for those connections?
They don't get into the specifics of what he does in the cave.
Yeah.
But they do connect it to the idea of like an artist's retreat. Artists, they often need that isolation to really tap into their creativity, to experiment, refine their work. And then they're ready to share their art with the world.
Oh, I like that. The artist's retreat. So Zarathustra's in the cave, not hiding away. He's working on his message, shaping it, so it has more impact when he comes back, like mastering his craft. the craft of wisdom, I guess you could say.
Exactly. And that brings us back to, the Übermensch, that it's not a destination. It's this constant creation of yourself. It's not about being perfect. It's about always striving to refine yourself, becoming more skillful at living. And solitude. That's a powerful tool for that.
Like solitude is the studio, where we create our own masterpieces. And then we get to share those masterpieces with the world. Here's what I'm wondering, though. The Source podcast talks about living companions, not just like an audience. How do we even cultivate those relationships, the deep ones, the ones that go both ways? It feels like it takes more than just having something smart to say.
Yeah, you're right. Brilliant ideas aren't enough. It takes vulnerability, empathy, really listening to people, learning from them. The Source podcast made this point about how the best conversations, the most profound ones, they happen when you step outside your own echo chamber. When you talk to people who see things differently. They even called it seeking friction, not in a bad way, but in a way that sparks new ideas, challenges you to grow.
Seeking friction, huh? Love that. It's so easy to just stay in your bubble with people who agree with you. But if you really want to push yourself to understand more, you got to be open to that friction. It's like, instead of preaching from a mountaintop, you're down in the valley, having a conversation around a campfire.
I like that. It really captures, the whole point of Zarathustra's journey, doesn't it? It's not about dictating truth. It's about dialogue, inquiry, growing together, transformation, recognizing that we all have something to teach each other. And that wisdom, it's a group project, not a solo one.
We've come full circle, haven't we? Back to wisdom needing connection. It's not enough to just have these insights. You got to share them. Test them, refine them through dialogue, through interacting. And who knows, maybe those moments of friction, maybe those were the best ideas come from.
It's true, isn't it? Iron sharpens iron. And sometimes the people who challenge us the most, they're the ones who help us become our sharpest, most insightful selves.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Zarathustra, what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners? What do you hope they'll keep thinking about?
One thing. Embrace the dance between solitude and connection. Give yourself that space to look inward. But don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Talk to people who will challenge you. Find those living companions, the ones who will push you to grow, to question, to become the most authentic, the most insightful you. And remember, you never really finish creating yourself. It's an ongoing thing, this refining, this seeking friction, this embracing connection.
That's a great way to put it. Zarathustra's journey is just the start. Now it's our turn to find our own tightropes and our own living companions to help us through the adventure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep reaching for those connections, the ones that spark real wisdom